Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this regular council meeting. I have a motion moved by Brian Thompson, second by Karen Terziano. Be it resolved, the regular council meeting agenda dated Monday, July 22nd, 2019, be adopted as printed and circulated. All those in favor? That's carried. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a conflict on item 724, Development Services Committee. A personal reason, a family member is employed by the applicant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a number of invited and ceremonial presentations. The first one is Drew Pahapel and Rebecca McDonald of Pahapel Associates to review the 2019 financial statements. Welcome, Drew. You're on your own. What happened to Rebecca?
Is that on?
That's
or
on.
off?
That's, you just turned it off? It's on?
It's on?
You're good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, yes, a couple of regrets this evening. Unfortunately, one due to a travel schedule and the other one due to a death in the family. So our thoughts are actually with Rebecca and her family this evening. In any event, that leaves you with me for the evening. We all have a couple of hours to spare, right? Just kidding.
If you take a couple of hours, we'll probably have new auditors next year.
Perfect. Okay. I will say in advance, I'll apologize, my presentation is a little bit more formal this evening. We have a few more details in the statements this year than usual, and so I didn't want to sort of miss anything. So I have a few prepared notes, and so it'll be a little more scripted than usual. But in any event, here to present, obviously, the annual financial statements for the Corporation of the Town of Huntsville on a consolidated basis. You ask, why is it consolidated? Because it also includes the results of the library and the business improvement area. We also present the audit report for the trust fund statement, which is essentially your cemeteries, and the post-audit letter. We will touch on that at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, if we could flip to page 1 of your package, which is entitled the Independent Auditor's Report. Happy to obviously report that we have, again this year, a clean audit opinion, which says that the financial statements present in all material respects the financial statement of the Corporation of the Town of Huntsville as at December 31st, 2018, without any material errors or concerns. So that's obviously, municipalities are required to have a clean opinion, so that's obviously a good thing that is where we're at. I will also say, and this is all I'm probably going to touch on the trust fund statements, is that it too had a clean opinion. So that's probably all we really need to note on that front. I will say that our audit is conducted in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. I would like to draw our attention to paragraph number 4, entitled Other Matters. There is what the paragraph says is that there's a restatement of comparative numbers. This has to do with a restatement that is related to tangible capital assets. We will touch on more detail as we go through the presentation here. But that does show up right in the face of the auditor's report. Paragraph 5 of the report says that states that these financial statements are the responsibility of management, and as much as we may assist in the preparation of these statements, the final responsibility still falls with management. It's always important to note that these are statements of management, and council signs the statements as well as management of the corporation. So again, notable highlight there. I'll talk a little bit about what constitutes an audit. An audit is conducted on what we would say a sample basis. We do not go and review every single transaction of the town. We also would not be able to fulfill our audit engagement if we did so, because the hours involved would be insurmountable. So what we do is we look at certain financial statement risk areas, and then we actually design our testing around those risks. An example of that is where we have something such as property taxation. We view that as not necessarily a risky area, but an area of certain important interest for the users, being ratepayers of the financial statements. And so in that area, we do fairly significant testing when it comes to property taxation, such as full reperformance of what the total taxation is, as well as control testing on the system that actually bills taxation on an individual ratepayer basis to help ensure that the system is working correctly and that we're billing individual ratepayers correctly. So that's just an example of how we go about doing an audit. Nothing in particular, I just picked that because we can all relate to it. So that concludes the independent auditor's report. So if you could flip to page 3 of the package, which is the consolidated statement of financial position, more commonly known as the balance sheet. We like to come up with new names for things ever so often. And we'll walk through some of the results here on a high level, obviously. We can see that the town at the end of the year had cash balances of approximately $13,700,000. That was up by about $4 million from last year, mainly attributable to the sale of the Waterloo building, which we'll talk to a little bit later in the presentation as well, a little bit. So if we see taxes receivable are very comparable to last year. If you turn to page 16 of the package, there is a note there on other income. Included in that other income is interest and penalties on taxation of approximately $683,000. Always an important number to look at when looking at your receivables. That said, the receivables are very comparable to last year, so we don't have any concerns in that area. I will then skip down to the investment in Lakeland Holdings. This represents the town's 21.74% share of Lakeland Holdings, the value of which has increased by about $1 million in the current year over last year, the details of which can be found on page 12 and 13, note 6 of the package. I won't go through them at this point because we've probably reviewed them previously. So, and then as we move down the balance sheet, we have accounts payable and accrued liabilities. Again, very comparable, around $6 million over year. So no notable comment there. Deferred revenue. Note 7, page 13 has some details. Total deferred revenue is a combination of obligatory reserve fund and some general deferred revenue. Altogether about $3.1 million, up slightly from last year. Most of the increase is due to cash in lieu of parklands reserve, deferred revenue, which has increased, which is essentially cash received as part of different development fees and earmarked for parkland development in future periods. There's also some federal gas tax deferred in there, which will be used in future periods. So that is that part. Municipal debt has decreased from $7.9 million to $7.2 million for the year, details of which are on note 8, page 14 and 15 of the package. I will note there was no new municipal debt acquired in 2018. The combined principal and interest payments were approximately $1,075,000, which is well below the ministry prescribed annual repayment limit of $3.2 million. So we're fairly healthy as far as the ministry guidelines go. Nothing to do with financial responsibility. However, those guidelines are certainly something that the MMAH puts out. So then we can move on to, we're going to move on to the capital assets. We can see that we have a total investment net book value of the tangible capital assets of approximately $81.5 million. This is where our restatement happened, and we'll talk to it, but let's talk about the current year results in capital assets first, and then move on to the restatement. So of note for the year, we purchased approximately $5.5 million in capital assets additions, and we had approximately $6.9 million in amortization. That does represent what we call a net deterioration in capital assets of approximately $1.3 million. However, I would caution amortization is based on historical estimates and costs of the assets and does not necessarily reflect where a well-tuned asset management plan would direct spending. The other thing you have to look at is spending on long-term assets. Obviously, if we look at 1 year in succession, it's too short a time frame. So really, we need to be looking at longer-term averages when we're comparing sort of are we keeping up with the way our assets are depleting. So that's sort of my comments on that. Now, we can move to where we have just opened the evening on the restatement of the capital assets. So if we could actually turn to note 2 on pages 10 and 11 of the financial statements. I'm going to read to you part of this note. only because I feel it pertinent to do so. I will say, so the way the restatement works is we actually need to restate, these financial statements represent not only 2018 numbers, but on the statements, we also have comparative numbers from 2017. And so when we go do a restatement, we actually need to restate December 31st, 2017 numbers before we can move on to the current year. I'll read what the restatement sort of is around, and then I'll talk in more plain English as to what it's come about to be. So during the year, the town completed its implementation of a new capital asset software management program. In order to improve the overall financial statement presentation and accurate measurement of the tangible capital assets of the town, during the implementation, a review of the accounting measurement, including historical cost and accumulated amortization, asset category classification, and presentation categories were completed. As a result of this review, the town has implemented a change in certain asset classifications with a resultant change in historical amortization amounts. These changes, detailed below, have been presented as a change in accounting policy and have been applied on a retroactive basis with restatement of prior years' amounts. In addition, during the software implementation, several errors in certain recorded historical costs and related amortization was identified. These errors, again detailed below, have been corrected on a retroactive restated basis. So what does that all mean? No, there wasn't a whole bunch of mistakes made previously. Let's make that clear. This is, if I go back early on in the PSAB 3150 days, about a little less than a decade, but almost a decade ago, I went to a seminar on tangible capital assets, and the presenter said, you know, your asset listings and asset management are sort of like a fine wine. They get better with age. And we sort of looked at him and thought, well, that's sort of funny, but what do we mean? Essentially, in 2007 and 2008, all townships across Ontario were tasked with putting their capital assets on the books, which they had never previously been. As you can imagine, these assets have been acquired over the past, I guess in the town of Huntsville's case, since, when is incorporation? 1886, so 100 plus years. The ability to do that in a 6-month time frame is quite an insurmountable task. So as that happened, there were a lot of estimates and, I don't want to say guesswork, but certainly assumptions that had to be made to practically get the information out. And since that time frame, we've had a culture that has developed of what we would consider asset management, whereby we have much more robust asset management plans. And as we're doing that, we are seeing assets that perform differently than how we thought they would back then, along with we are also discovering certain misses and minor errors that existed. So the best way to describe this in this case, and I'll use an example right from the town here, what town staff in conjunction with external consultants have come up with is that your roads previously had been segmented into two what it's called non-homogeneous sections, being a road surface and a road base. As time has gone by, it's become more evident that we really don't service our roads based on road surface and road base. Therefore, to say that they had different useful lives was sort of misleading. And so over time, we've figured out that by putting them together is a better representation of how we actually go and spend and service and repair and replace the roads. So a large part of the restatement actually has to do with the putting together of those roads. And so accordingly, we feel, your staff feels, and your external consultants feel that you now have a better representation of the true value of the roads in the township. That's probably the most significant portion of the restatement. A little bit of work related around some of the street lights and some changes to values there, but those are quite immaterial. We can walk through the note quickly, and we'll see that it's a little bit confusing because the note states accumulated surplus. What I would say is that your capital assets basically went up in value by about $3.5 million as a result of this restatement. which we feel is a better depiction of where the assets are at this point in time. So if there's any questions about it, I think I'll address it at the end of the presentation, but hopefully that describes where it's come from. I will say that we work with 11 other municipalities, both far, wide, a little bit larger than Huntsville, a little bit smaller than Huntsville, and this is quite common over the last 2 to 3 years as asset management has come into play, that we've been dealing with these restatements. So by no means is this outside of the box thinking for Huntsville. This is right in line with industry standards and practices. So, that is all I will say about the restatement. If we can move on to the, sorry about that, page 4 of the package, which is your consolidated statement of operations and accumulated surplus, otherwise known as the income statement. I'll run through a couple of high-level things here. The annual deficit is $3.97 million approximately. Now, before we say that we had a deficit year, no, that is your external accounting deficit, which very much differs from your internal results, budgetary results, by way of capital asset additions, amortization, any use of reserves, et cetera, et cetera. So that number does not relate at all to the surplus and or deficit that you would have on an operating basis, which obviously your staff have walked you through at this point. So that's a big one. I will then like to draw your attention to the row which is entitled Other and has a note number 11 reference. In that is we have a loss shown here of $932,000. If we could actually turn to note 11, I would just like to highlight what is involved there. And that, for the most part, you can see that's actually where our penalties, interest on taxations, and there's a sort of a slush box of different accounts in there. But the most important one is the gain, well, not most important, but most notable, I think, is the gain loss on the sale of tangible capital assets, in which case we have, for accounting purposes, a loss, which relates directly to the sale of the Waterloo Centre. As much as we did have we did sell the building for approximately $3.9 million. On the books, the building had a cost of about $7.7 million. Now, I would like to caution that those funds were not all town funds that paid for that building. So you cannot look at it as a loss from a business perspective. That's simply the accounting results. And again, one of the reasons why municipal accounting is so confusing as compared to taxation and actual results of the town. So that's just the biggest thing I'd like to highlight there. Otherwise, that pretty well concludes the formal presentation on the statements themselves. I will then, I would like to run over, if we turn to note 1, which is your summary of significant accounting policies. Obviously, we noted that we had a policy change with respect to that we've eliminated one of the classifications of road bases. That's really the major change in the policy accounting policies for the year. Otherwise, no changes. We do review these policies regularly and compare them with other like municipalities, and at this point we don't have any concerns around it. So that's about it there. Note number 9 is always a useful one. It is bank indebtedness. It's good to make note that $4.5 million of a revolving demand facility exists with TD Bank. Should the cash flow be required by the town in the future, however, at year end we've drawn $0 of that facility. Those are all my comments on the financial statements. I will then touch on the post-audit letter, and we're very happy to report that we have no reportable items in the letter other than to say that the audit did go relatively smoothly, especially considering the significant amount of work that was involved with the restatement. Always a challenging process, and we would like to thank Julia, Linda, and the balance of the finance department for their professionalism and dedication in getting the numbers out correctly and in a relatively timely manner and assisting us. It was greatly appreciated, and other than that, thank you very much for listening this evening. If you have any questions, absolutely happy to field them.
Great, okay. Thank you, Drew. I'll go to council then. Are there any questions from any members of council? Councilor Withey?
Under health services, you say included in health services and maintenance upkeep of municipally controlled cemeteries. First of all, I think it's interesting you call that health cemeteries or health services. But what else is in there?
So under health services.
I think Julia knows.
Yeah,
off the top
Julia,
of
maybe
her head.
I could defer that to Julia a little bit.
Just to clarify, that's the ministry's classification system, so that's how we have to report things under the financial information return, the cemeteries, and it is only the cemeteries, that's under health services.
It's only it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
If I would, if you turn to actually page 18 of the financial statements, we have what is segmented disclosures and expenditures by object. This is where we've taken the income statement and it actually gets divided up into different sections. So if you look under health services, you can see what has been attributed to health services, both on the revenue side and then on the expense side. So if you look across, yeah, exactly. and down the
Okay, any
column.
other questions from council? Okay, Drew, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Excellent presentation. Okay, our next presentation is Cindy Sommerfeld-Madeley from Hutchison Sand and Gravel and Steve Hernan. We're going to talk about the ball diamonds. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did.
Good.
Very impressive.
Oh,
Never
Thank you.
happens.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
And it's exciting when people bring gifts.
Bring guests
Yeah,
and dirt.
yeah,
I like
absolutely.
it.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, as you know, we have a report later in the agenda dealing with the renewal of the ballpark, the results of the tender contract. There's been a lot of questions about the infield mix. So rather than me try and handle them, I've asked Cindy from Hutchison Sand and Gravel. The contractor is Hall Construction, and Hall Construction has a contract with Hutchison Sand and Gravel to provide the infield mix and to do the installation on it. So I thought rather than me try and bumble this up, I will just turn it over to Cindy, and she can explain the different infield mixes which are available and which one's in the contract. And then if the council wants to do something later at our report time, we can discuss it further.
Great, okay. You're on.
I'm on. Okay. I was asked to just start with a very brief background. Before Hutchison, I've been with Hutchison for 13 years. Before that, I was with a company called Consport. Consport and Marco Clay, you may have heard that name, are the only two companies that were producing ball mixes, and they were always red clay ball mixes. So once Consport, the owner, retired, Hutchison bought Consport, and I came along with it. And when I came to Hutchison, we realized there was a need for mixes other than red clay. Not everybody could afford it, could maintain it, wanted it. So we have developed a couple of other mixes, as well as our Huntsville mix, which we've been providing for many years. We have actually modified it to improve it over the years, but it is a very old park and in need of some TLC. So the Marco Clay that, the Washington mix that has been brought up, our Muskoka mix is essentially the same material. We've been competing for a long time, so of course we have to have materials that can compete, price-wise and the makeup of the materials. So they're essentially made of crushed brick, which is somewhat porous, raw clay, and sand. The only difference would be we have granite sand, they are down in the south, they would have limestone sand. So really not a big difference. Size-wise, the same. We have reports for the two higher-end mixes here, and you'll see that although it may look as though there's 27% silt and clay, that is particle size. That is not how much clay by volume. So essentially, when you're developing ball mixes, the higher the clay content, a little more maintenance, but you're going to have a firmer surface, and you're going to have slower drainage. So there's pros and cons to all of these. The standard mix is the lower end of the ball mixes. It would be the softest footing, it would be the quickest draining, it would be the least maintenance, and the lowest in cost. If you want something for a municipal fields that will work for all types of ball play, then the Granite Light and the Muskoka Mix are the next two that would be ideal for the fields in Huntsville. The Granite Light is a mix of crushed granite, sand, and raw clay. Slightly less raw clay than the Muskoka Mix, but their drainage is about the same because the Muskoka Mix, the brick is porous, whereas the granite is not. So the brick is going to hold a little bit of more moisture. They both have good footing, good standard footing. You can slide on it safely. It's all about playability. As far as maintenance goes, I mean, these mixes are not magic. Mother Nature does create havoc sometimes on these things. So there are times where over very long dry periods, the material will become quite hard and you may have to apply some water or conditioners. There's a lot of conditioners sold on the market for that purpose, as well as very wet periods. We have conditioners specifically for that. These materials do rely somewhat on surface drainage, and that's why maintenance is probably the most important thing when it comes to these materials. If you have poor maintenance, you're going to have issues with low spots, you're going to have issues with puddling, you're going to have issues with unsafe play, and so on. So I have a lot of faith in the equipment that they have and the way that they're doing their grooming now, other than the fact that, you know, always shorthanded, not enough hours in the day. The Muskoka Mix is not going to be a huge difference in maintenance from the Granite Light. They will be a little more than the standard mix, but again, I think they're fully capable. The only negative thing I ever hear about Muskoka Mix is it stains uniforms. Nobody likes the red color. So other than that, you're never going to, I don't think you're ever going to please everyone. There's always going to be someone who has something to say about whatever mix we have or use. But I think you're going to find that you'd be very happy with either. The red clay, I have to say, is because of the color. A lot of people think it looks like the pros. It is very impressive on a diamond when you see the fields in the red. But I think you'd be happy with either. So whatever makes you all happy makes me happy.
Well, if you
We
can
will
make this crowd
whatever-
all happy at the same time, you will have accomplished something very impressive.
Okay, then just go with the Muskoka Mix. No one will be disappointed. I can't promise you that, but that would be my feeling, but, yeah. so
Okay,
there we
you're
go.
prepared to answer a few questions?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
If anybody
And
has any?
I will start with Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you, Steve and Cindy, for that presentation. Maybe the first time we've ever had sand here in the council chambers, but...
I didn't even open the line and pass them around, I'm sorry.
Exactly. In terms of the cost, are the costs all similar, Cindy, or is there a difference in the costs?
Of course, the standard mix is the lowest. The Granite Light, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the Granite Light and Muskoka Mix, there's not a huge difference between these two. The standard mix and the Granite Light were put into the tender, so this is a provisional item. The Muskoka Mix has just been brought up by people involved, and so that's why we've sort of put it on the table. And that's why Marco Clay was brought up, so we had to let everyone know that we have that same material that was asked about. So price-wise, there's not a huge difference between these two. And if going to a Muskoka Mix, the red clay is essentially going to make everyone happy. It is good for any type of ball play.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Maybe I can just add to that too. The standard mix is in the contract, it's in the contract price. To go to the Granite Light, the next step up, it's approximately $22,000 more. To go to the Muskoka Mix, it's approximately $26,000 more.
Okay, Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question about the maintenance aspect. Which one has the best lifespan, and which one takes the less maintenance? Do you know?
Lifespan, okay, so granite lasts forever. I think we all know that. Never breaks down. The Muskoka mix, the crushed brick, will break down over time. As far as maintenance goes, as I said, these are very similar because they both have red clay, and then the Muskoka mix has slightly more, but because the brick is porous and holds moisture, you're going to have the same, essentially the same footing, the same maintenance. So the way that the groomer that they have now and the way they maintain their fields now will be essentially work for either of these. Like I said, the only issues are ideally, if you could water your fields every morning and groom them every afternoon before you play, that would be great for every ball mix. If they do have situations where they get really dry periods, right now the standard mix gets very loose, these will probably get quite hard, but they have the equipment. They have tines that they can use to break it up. They have water if they need to. So I don't think there's going to be, I don't think they're going to see a huge difference as far as time involved to maintain them.
Okay, anyone else? Deputy Mayor Tiziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to confirm, Cindy, your company is going to provide the training for a couple of years, is it, for the
Yeah, we
maintenance
have-
of these fields?
Yeah, we have someone coming in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall of next year. And when they come in the spring, they will actually train whomever. I know right now, I think there's only one full-time person and the rest is summer help. So that makes it difficult to, every year you've got new people. But if Ken and this full-time person get the training, then they should be able to pass that along. And they do know how to use their groomer, so hopefully it'll be an easy transition.
Councillor Weed?
Thank you, Worship. Down in Bracebridge a few years ago, they struggled with the installation of their fields when they were first built.
Okay, so I can explain that.
Okay.
Our Pro Diamond mix was specified, and our Pro Diamond mix is essentially clay and sand. There's no brick in it. And so it's even a finer product and even a firmer surface. Maybe not the ideal for a municipal park like that, but the biggest issue was it's built on a swamp. So drainage was a problem from the beginning. Even the turf was floating. So we would go in and we would constantly go back and try and maintain. The biggest issue was they had a turf company who mow lawns going in and grooming the diamonds. And they kept taking them out of grade. They didn't change their patterns. So we went back a number of times. I even took George Bannerman, who owns Bannerman and sold them their equipment, go up and train them and try to get them to keep the crown so that they wouldn't have low spots, they wouldn't have drainage issues. We went in at one point to do some maintenance, and there was a sinkhole 2 feet deep like this at third base in the farthest diamond where the kids play, just from the water. So it was a problem from the beginning. We did suggest adding the crushed brick, which at that time, the responsibility of Peak Fields changed, and the person who took over then felt that they needed to replace it with what is now Marco Clay's Washington mix, which is essentially this Muskoka mix. So had they added our brick, they would have ended up with the same thing, but the choice was made to put in the Washington mix. And they still have some issues a little bit with rain, but we all do, I think. Any field can. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from council? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. This is coming back up later in the agenda where we'll make some decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you want me to take these away? Sure.
Okay, the next one is Mark Misko from the District of Muskoka and Steve Vernon. We'll talk about Main Street Streetscape Project.
So I'll jump in and start. As you know, town and the district are undertaking some major projects right now. District's taking the lead on the King William project, which is moving along rapidly now. We're starting to see some good progress down there. One of the things that came up during that project, due to the delay in starts and whatnot, is that project, as you know, has now been stretched out over 2 years. So it'll be this full fall, and it'll be back in the spring to finish that job off. While that was going on, working with the district, we've been out looking for the consulting engineering company to do the design work for Main Street. And of the 4 companies we've narrowed it down to, which we're still in the interview process on, all 4 have identified our schedule as a problem. Too tight of timelines, and they're concerned that if we keep pushing for a Main Street start next spring, we'll run into the same problems where it'll become a 2-year project. So prior to us awarding a contract for the consulting engineers, we wanted to talk to council about pushing it back 1 further year, which would be 2021. There's a lot of good benefits from it. Now we look at where stage we're at in the project. It'll give us additional time to pursue some funding opportunities, which we're starting to hear out there, for drainage work, for joint projects between different levels of government. It better lines up with our budgets for funding from both the town and the district perspective, and gives us better timelines with the engineering companies. Now, if we agree to move it back 1 year, we're not going to take the foot off the gas. We're still hoping to have a consulting engineer in place by September 1 at the latest, but gives us good drawings coming out of the winter, good discussions, good public meetings on everything, gives us some good budget numbers. We're not pushing it. If we continue to want to try and push this through to next year, it means that we have to have the drawings and the engineering and the planning all done by January of this year to try and get to tender. We're just not going to make those dates. We're going to end up in another King William where we're starting construction in the middle of the summertime, and it'll carry through to the next year. So what we are recommending at this point in time is we just shove it back to 2021 for the actual build, and it would be a 1-season construction. What did I miss, Mark?
No, that pretty much hit it all. The only thing I would mention is that there is some potential for spring 2022 work with the final asphalt lift and spring landscaping. I think we've had that discussion around the table before about warranty work. With respect to the final asphalt lift, we'd like to see it perform. We don't want to cut through both lifts if we don't have to. And with respect to the landscaping, discussions with some of the planning architects or the landscape architects that we've had initial conversations with, spring's obviously the best time to put that type of stuff in. So that's what we're hearing on some of the final works on that. Overall, I think Steve may have mentioned it already, this timeline allows a bit more consultation and a bit more design time, which we feel would significantly reduce any risks that could potentially arise from this project.
Okay, questions? Councillor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very quickly, Steve, you made reference to will give us time for additional funding opportunities, and I'm wondering if you have any sense of what they might be, or is it just generally?
What we're hearing talk is some federal, municipal, provincial projects. And what they're telling us when we're on any of the conferences with the funding groups is they're looking for joint projects. They're looking for projects which is going to help with climate change. And because we're doing storm sewers, we're doing the streetscape, we're doing accessibility, we just think that we're checking a lot of boxes here, and it'll give us an opportunity to really chase some serious funding down.
Any other questions? Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Worship. I guess the flip side of that question is, will this delay help with costs? Or do you see any projections changing, bumping it out another year?
Thank you. With respect to the cost associated for the design and engineering work, the next steps for this is once we have the discussion around here and yay or nay on proceeding under this schedule, we'd like to offer that back up to the groups that we're talking to. We've conducted some pre-qualifications, done some what I'll call group interviews with the proponents or the bidding companies. We'd like to put this schedule back to them and see if there are savings in that. They're essentially, with the timelines we had originally, they were really crashing to try and meet those timelines. We heard some, not pushback, but just concerns about that schedule. I think this would alleviate some of the resource requirements on their end. Not saying we're going to slow the project down, but they don't have to have all hands on deck all the time, so we could see some cost savings through that.
Anyone else? Could you speak just a little bit more about the King William project? From my personal perspective, I think I'm fine with the notion of the Main Street section being pushed back an extra year. I think that certainly buys the downtown merchants a little extra time to prepare for what's going to be a mess and a disruption and probably hard on their businesses. But It is a little frustrating that King William Street is now going to be stretched out over 2 years, which means our downtown main artery is going to be a disaster for 3 years, not 2 years. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to, why it is that this has now been stretched out to 2 years, and what we're doing to try to, move it along as quickly as we can.
Thank you for your question. The King William job, when we tendered it, we did have those significant milestone timelines that were presented in the phase 4 and 5. And just looking at the constructability of it, with some of the tendering timelines and the pre-consultation we had, it did get a late jump as of July, I think is when they first started mobilizing to the site. So some of the timelines that we're seeing are not only the volume of work that needed to be done for that portion on King William, it's also related back to some of the staging for the warranty, and those works we want to complete in the spring with the final lift. There's also just the volume of work itself and completing that. We didn't want to work all the way into winter. We'd like to push the season as late as we can, but there is recognition that we don't want to work in frosted up conditions. We want to wait till the frost is out of the ground before we finish it. So agreed, it does create a bit more of an inconvenience for that longer timeline. I think one of the strategies we had with scheduling the King William work first was to get that one kind of done and out of the way, and then we could really focus on the downtown one. My personal belief is that we would be in this situation if King William was a go or not at this point. With respect to the Main Street work, there's a lot of moving pieces on King William, and there's a recognition that there'll be even a few more on the Main Street portion. So we really want to buy that design and engineering time and reduce that project risk associated with it.
So was the tender issue late?
For King William?
Yeah.
The tendering and the award met the timelines. We did push them as quickly as we could. The project was initiated essentially late last summer and into the fall, and it was just by the time we got through the design stages, we crunched it as much as we could to get to break ground. And that's when Steve's saying we don't want to let up on the gas on this one. We don't want to do that, but there's a recognition that this has significantly more moving pieces with the streetscaping and everything like that. The King William work is more or less a remove and replace, is what I'll call it. So it's a lot more straightforward with respect to scope. There could be a few surprises. That's the way civil work tends to end up. But knowing that we've got a pretty massive project with respect to the streetscaping on the Main Street, that's kind of why we're focusing on buying some more time with it.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mark. Thanks, Mark, for everything.
With regards to the King William portion, did the Bell infrastructure throw a real big wrinkle into that? I know that talking to some of the people at Bell, they were concerned about their particular infrastructure and how it was constructed and so on. Secondly, the second part of my question, if I might, Your Worship, is Meadow Park. When you're talking about extending these contracts into the second year, is that Meadow Park, or is that the second year also include King William?
Okay, I'll answer your question, your first question right off. The work on King William itself, I guess the Meadow Park, I can kind of address that. The phases 4 and 5 are in the second year, so they're up top towards the Shell station, or sorry, the Petro Canada station.
Okay.
I'm a bit, and the first question. So there's not a lot of work on Meadow Park. There's a force main portion for the future servicing out at Golden Pheasant, and that's part of the contract that we're in now. And then if you could repeat your first question, sorry.
With regard, I know we're talking with Bell Telephone that they were concerned with their infrastructure and how, I'm not quite sure, I don't know the technical aspects of it, but it sounded like it was creating some complications for going forward with our project.
Sure, thank you for repeating that. There were some initial concerns with Bell. They came in during some of the design meetings that we had initially. Their concern was basically the size of the infrastructure that they have running up King William, as well as the condition and age of that asset. And it wasn't necessarily known at the time how it would hold up. We've since had a chance to daylight it. We've got a bit more of a scope in hand. We know what it looks like. We've seen it. It's in better shape than we had thought initially. And that was the main concern, was there's a lot of overlapping utilities on King William, and if we had to span and excavate underneath for our sewer,
Right.
how could this hold up? Would it break? And you know, it's a massive line, so The radar was up on it, but we've since been able to do a bit more of an assessment on it. The concrete looks good. We've got a couple shoring options that we're working on with the contractor right now to make sure that we don't impact that utility.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Deputy Mayor Terziano.
Mark, by pushing the Main Street project off to 2021, when was the tender to go out and the contract awarded, had the project gone ahead in 2020? And when will it go out and be awarded if it's pushed to 21?
So under the 2020 schedule, we would essentially be awarding, it would have been a Q1 of 2020, so January, February, or March, it would have been right out the door with a start date kind of as fast as we could get. With this timeline, we're looking at tendering in September, which puts us in a better situation in that we've talked to a couple other municipalities that have done this, and when you have a component project this large, the earlier you can tender, the easier it is to get more competitive bids in and make those decisions because it lines up the resources for the following season.
So you're saying that you will actually tender in September of 2019 for the 2021 project?
It would be September in 2020.
So I guess my question is, why so late? Like, if a project was at one point scheduled to go in 2020, why are we pushing the tendering and the awarding and everything off so late?
Sure. Some of that is to just get the design time in and align it with our budgeting. We've got 60, 80, and 100% design timelines for the engineering consultant. We're still essentially interviewing them to onboard them. So some of the concerns we heard was that a project of this scope and scale would need a better lead time on design. And that's some of the time that we're getting by extending the actual construction itself. And that does allow us better timing for our budgeting as well. We're anticipating, I've just got a quick list, but say in June we had an 80% design. That aligns a lot better with both the districts and the town's capital budgeting, in that if we need to make an adjustment, it's not coming in last minute. We'll have a pretty good handle on what the cost will be going into 2021, mid-year 2020.
Councillor Armour.
Hate to give us off, thank you, Worship. I just want to go back to the King William aspect, the street lamp lights at Chafee and King William. Can you extend the left-hand turn on that? Because today when they had the pylon set up, there's only room for 2 vehicles there, and if there's a lot of cars turning, it's back in traffic up quite a ways. So that left-hand turn just needs to be extended. Thank you.
Absolutely, I can look into that. Thanks.
If I can just add to that too, the district and us, we've been talking recently about what we can do in that stretch. We've been watching the traffic patterns, and we're looking at some additional detour routes and better signage, because we're seeing that too. So we have had discussions, and we think we're meeting with the contractor later this week to talk about some other options down through that area to help speed that along and keep the traffic flowing.
Councillor Weed.
Thank you, Worship. Mark, can you just remind us, when will the King William project actually be wrapped up? And then how much downtime would there be between that finishing and the staging and starting of the Main Street?
The intent right now is to have King William wrapped up before the summer season next year. So there would be some downtime. You'd like to get a full summer season out of it, as well as a full fall and a spring, until we're right back into kickoff again. So that's where our substantial completion is.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we have one deputation, and it is the Huntsville Historical Society, and it looks like it's just Tricia. Welcome. No Liz?
No, apparently she's been detained.
Well, there you go. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
There you go.
Your Worship, Council, I'd like to thank you all for allowing me a little of your time this evening to introduce our new publication. Well, it's a new old publication. It's the Pictures from the Past. This book was first published in 1985 under the direction of Maureen Hunt and a committee from the Pioneer Village. And it was popular and republished again in the early 90s, but this has not been available since, I would say, the middle of 1990. And we keep getting asked for copies of this book. So the Huntsville and Area Historical Society formed a committee, and over the winter we have corrected some of the text, brought it up to date, and redone all the pictures, plus adding a few other pictures. And it came as a great surprise to us that Maureen Hunt, in her will, had left us $10,000 to go ahead with this publication, which has brought it on a lot quicker than we thought. And with great respect for Maureen, she loved Huntsville, she loved heritage, and without her, I'm sure the Pioneer Village would not be what it is today. And we'd like to, well, we dedicate this book to Maureen Hunt, and I'd just like to introduce the council to this book. And it's amazing the clarity of the pictures with the new technology. We're actually seeing some people in the pictures that we didn't even know existed in them. So, and I'd also like to just leave a copy with the council here, so when they've got a few minutes, they can maybe flip through and just see. I think we've done a very good job of
So
it.
did you just say you're gonna leave that here for free?
I am.
I had to buy mine at Pioneer
Well, you
Village,
see,
and you're
you
gonna give
jump-
all these guys one?
We wanted to present you with it, but you were too eager.
I'm too kidding.
So I'd like to thank you very much for the time, and I hope that you get a chance to look through it and do enjoy it. And
Well, thank you. I should let council know, I have one of the reprints from the 90s, I guess, in my office, plus my new copy. So, and I've looked through and compared, and it is remarkably improved, the pictures, so it's very true, it's lovely. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'll definitely be getting one of those too, Tricia, thank you. What are you going to be retailing them for? And where,
$25.
and where can we get them, at the village?
Right now, we have them in artisans, or we will have them in artisans shortly.
Down here, yeah.
And hopefully there will be a few outlets. It came, because of what Maureen Hunt did, it sort of took us to publishing a lot quicker than what we had planned on, and the publishing was quicker than we thought, so it came as a big surprise
many
that
did
it
you
was
get?
ready 2 weeks ago.
How many did you get to print?
500.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Witt? That was your question? Okay.
So I would like to let everybody know that if there's other places available, it will be, get the word out one way or another.
Great. Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so new business, we want to have a little discussion. We're doing new business right now and at the end. But we got a couple items here that we wanted to talk about up front, because there are people that have to leave. So repairs to the Huntsville Civic Square is a discussion that we wanted to have early on. Am I starting this, I guess? Where's Steve? Did he have to leave? All right, I'll start. So, council is familiar with this, with the walkway and stairs along the, I guess, the west side of the building here. We had budgeted about $75,000 or $80,000 to rebuild all of that with a ramp. As it turns out, we don't have enough room to make the ramp accessible, and this doesn't work. And so we're replacing what's there. So the cost for that has come in dramatically lower, somewhere around $13,000, I think. And so I'm sure all of you have seen the front of the Civic Center. The walkway in is deteriorating rather rapidly. And there was some repair done to eliminate some trip hazards, which has served to maybe make it safer, but look truly horrifying. It's a mess. And so we figured maybe we should talk about using the money that we had budgeted over here to get that cleaned up and fixed. And so because of the fact that this is so much cheaper, there is money in the budget. So I'm happy to entertain any comments or questions, or read the resolution first, or whatever you'd like. So, but I see hands going up, so I'll start with Councillor Hillcock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have one question, and that is what the timing might be with respect to that. If council were to approve that tonight, would we delay it until the end of the festival season? I'm just trying to imagine what it would be like if we have a construction zone.
No, the idea would be to actually, the idea was to start it next week and have it done in 2 days.
Oh, okay.
So to
it's a
coincide
fast-
with the festival schedule, make sure we don't interrupt that at all.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess they've been in touch with the contractors, they can have it done in 2 days. There's been some conversations with the supplier of the stone. They've got a better stone that will last longer
Okay.
under sort of high-traffic circumstance like that, where you're putting, salt and whatnot on it. So there'll be some improvements, and it can be done very quickly.
Okay, so that was my question. That's great.
Councillor Armour?
Thank you, Worship. Just to clarify, are we going to do that in addition to the sidewalk, or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Weed?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think you touched on my question, which was what is actually being put down, and if we have more information on what the actual product or process would be.
Yeah, it'll be like an interlocking stone like what's there
Okay.
now, but better, apparently.
Okay.
It'll stand up better under a high-traffic area. I don't have where's Steve? Can Greg answer some of these questions? Thanks, Greg.
Excuse me. They've got they've called it a new Banff mixed pavers sand color Banff Onyx soldier course. I don't know if that's exactly the information you're looking for, or it's a polymetric sand with a full restoration.
So you've got the trade name of the product now, which probably tells you nothing.
Okay. No, my apologies.
No worries, that's all good. Councillor
That's
Whitty?
what I got.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is about the issue with the ramp. When you said there was no room, is that, I guess, is it because we don't have the property going that way, or can we make the whole thing? I'm concerned about accessibility from front to back, because when the building's closed, a lot of people park and want to go this way.
Got to go around. Steve, can you speak to the ramp and why we're not doing the ramp now on the side of the building and we're replacing the stairs? There wasn't, why we're not doing that?
Yeah, I apologize for having to step out of the room. We are dealing with an oil leak, but the reason for the ramp is the physical space. For the size of the ramp and the length of the ramp, you can't just go down in one pass as per code, and it was Chris Nagy that was working on this extensively at Brandon Hall. You have to put a switch back in, come back and do another switch back and go back down, and there's not enough physical space between the town hall and the edge of our property. We'd be off our property, and you'd end up with like a 92-foot ramp or something. You can go 20 feet, and then you have to put a landing in, and then you can go another 20 feet on an angle, and you have to put a landing in, and by the time you go down and back and forth to get your grade where it meets the accessibility code, we're over onto the church property. The whole side of the building would just look like a concrete ramp with switchbacks back and forth. Physically won't fit.
Okay. Councillor Whitty?
Thank you. So you can't just grade the whole thing down, so it's one long grade, rather than have the
No.
hill? And does the idea of the ramp still have the stairs, or is it instead of?
So
In
my
the original thought, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding with the building code, you can replace the existing with the existing, or if you want to reconstruct it, it has to meet the Disabled Act. The Act talks about the distances, the switchbacks, and everything else. We physically don't have the room. We can replace what's there, like for like, but if we decide to reconstruct something different, it has to meet the building codes, all the accessibility codes. There's physically not enough room to put it in.
But we will be putting a railing in there now too, right? That's
Correct.
something that the Accessibility Advisory Committee has been asking for some time. So it'll be good to at least get that done. There was a question about the product that'll be used on the front of the Civic Center. It's a different, better stone, I understand?
Yes, so in talks with Brooklyn Concrete, the stone that was put down, it's a good product. It lasted 15 years. It was a tumbled rock, 50 millimeters. But it does come with the fractures in the rock, if you will, and as you've seen, all the chipping in the spaces. So the rock that they're proposing are the same pattern, but not the tumbled look, so it fits tighter and neater together, so you don't get that. And it's gone from a 50 mil product to a 70 mil product. It's a much thicker, stronger product. And the stuff that's down there now is 15 years of age, and with the salt and with the chipping of the ice, that's why it's deteriorated to the stage it has.
Deputy Mayor Terziano?
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Steve. You said a smoother product. There won't be any risk of slipping in the winter and during rainstorms, right?
No, we didn't go right to a flat, smooth product because that was one of the concerns. So it'll still have a ripple to it, but it's more of the edges where the blocks meet up. Now it's got the tumbled look, so you get the big gouges in it. This has a more of an even fit at the edges, but the surface itself still has a grip to it.
Okay, why don't I read the resolution then? If there are other questions, we can address them. Motion moved by Councillor Reeves, seconded by Deputy Mayor Terziano. Whereas $75,000 was approved in the 2019 operating budget for the revamping of the walkway along the west side of the Huntsville Civic Center, and whereas it has been determined that due to the steep grade, a ramp could not be constructed in this area, and therefore only the replacement of the stairs and installation of a new handrail is possible, thereby significantly reducing the cost. And whereas the brick walkway within the Huntsville Civic Center Square has deteriorated substantially, resulting in the immediate need for repair, therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to arrange for the replacing of the brick within the Huntsville Civic Center Square with the remaining funds. Any further questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Steve. Okay. Oops, sorry about that, everybody. The other thing we wanted to talk about was events in the downtown core. This is something that I asked to put on the agenda, and I'm looking for council to have some conversation. Hopefully we'll come out of this conversation with some direction for staff to work with some of our partners in the community. So I feel as though in some ways, our little downtown core has become a victim of its own success with a lot of events and things. And so, the most recent example, I think, was the Rib Fest, where, you know, the parking lot in Rivermill Park was, you know, closed for 5 or 6 days while they set up and prepared and ran the event. The closure of the swing bridge during the Ironman event, again, really certainly clogged traffic in the downtown core and made things difficult. And so I felt it was wise for us to have some conversation about this, just because in July and August I hear regularly from particularly Main Street business owners who point out that, you know, they really have sort of 60 days of key business that they really need to make sure they can make it through the year. And when we make it difficult for them to run their business for those 60 crucial days in the calendar, it's really hard for them. And I think the Ironman, you know, where it started and finished and closing the Main Street Bridge, heard from a lot of business owners that on that day it was a ghost town in Main Street, and they were kind of frustrated by it. So I felt council should have a conversation about this, and if we should maybe not have staff work with some of the very various volunteer groups, the Chamber, the BIA, and look at maybe some different policies related to specifically July and August. Like, you know, we should talk about whether we should, you know, not permit the closure of the swing bridge in those months, for example, or not permit the closure of any parking lots in those 2 months, for example. So I wanted to throw that out there. I'm sure other members of council have certainly heard the issue raised as well, so I wanted to have a conversation and see what other members of council felt. So I'll throw it out there, and I'll start with Deputy Mayor Terziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to just share a number of comments. We had a BIA meeting this past Thursday, and those two events were very fresh, so lots of comments. As everyone knows, the BIA is comprised of many business owners downtown, so they're right there at the front. So I'm just going to read some of the comments that came out of that meeting. So AO actually scheduled only 25% of their normal staff for that day. They've had, and I'm not sure it was this year, but in other years possibly, they've had items like outhouses in front of their doors for part of the event. They've had tents set up in front of their doors so that it obstructed people getting in and out. Rental pickups and drop-offs, obviously, at the back of their store were impeded quite a bit. And unacceptable gridlock throughout the downtown. There were some people who said it was taking as much as an hour to get down to the Algonquin Theater that day. That was basically triathlon, and there was certainly discussion that the route needs to be changed or needs to be looked at. Obviously, Rib Fest with the parking lot closure, again, in July and August, really unacceptable. The policy on our events for seat, I think they would like to see that communicated with the BIA when the events are downtown. With the Rib Fest, they were still cleaning up on Monday and caused traffic and delivery problems then. There were also some calls that I personally had about the noise. I guess with the Rib Fest, they were, music was part of it, but it was going from like noon till 10 at night, and it was carrying 4 and 5 blocks away from downtown. So there were some complaints about that. So that's just a few of the comments that we've been hearing.
Okay. Councillor Thompson.
Your worship, I haven't heard anything on a one-to-one basis, other than I've seen some things on social media, like I guess we all have. And there was discussion from some of the merchants, I guess, about the reduction in what would be a normal Sunday or whatever in terms of revenue. And I guess the question that came out of that for me was, okay, so if you're, and this had to do primarily with the 70.3, but if the question that came out of that for me was, well, if your revenue was down from what it would normally be on a Sunday on that day, how did the impact of those people in town for the 70.3 impact on the volume of business you did in the days prior to that? In other words, was there an evening of process type of thing? So that was one thing that wasn't discussed in the article. And so it made me rather curious. It was the one article I thought was rather one-sided about it. But anyway, it was, you know, not questioning the information that was there, but I just didn't know of how far it went and whether it went far enough in terms of the actual financial impact on merchants and so on. I'm just curious about that.
I'm not sure if I can answer that question for you, but. Councillor Weed?
Thank you, Worship. I guess I was going to maybe direct this back to Councillor Deputy Mayor Terziano about the amount of consultation between the BIA and the various groups and the events going on. I'm just wondering if there's maybe a breakdown in communication there, or if there's been some frustrations in terms of communication in general.
Go ahead.
There hasn't been the best communication, and I think through the seat application, and I don't know, Greg can confirm, generally there's a clause in there for the event organizer to notify certain people, and sometimes that's where the breakdown has occurred. So one of the reasons they would like to get the BIA circulated in it for these events is so that there is no communication breakdown. And I just wanted to add one more thing, because I didn't want my whole list of things to just be on the negative. The downtown actually, the businesses, they're not against the triathlon by any means. But one comment I missed is that maybe July's not the best month for it.
Yeah, I think I've said that all along, actually, but it's the triathlon people that seem adamant that it has to be in July. That Florida corporation. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think maybe it'd be advantageous if it was part of the seed program that when that application comes in, that we notify all interested parties, being OBP, Works, BIA, business owners, and actually not leave it up to the event organizers, but make it part of our internal seat application.
Yeah.
And then there's no question of whether everyone is notified or if there are going to be issues that we're not aware of regarding this application.
Councillor Weed?
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to kind of explore that a little more, and I'm wondering if we can distinguish between people being notified versus people actually participating in how the event will be rolled out, because AO can know for months if the triathlon's coming, but if someone plunks a tent in front of their doors, that doesn't do them much good if they know about it and have no say in it, I guess.
Well, I think that that's part of one of the reasons why I think it's, you know, if we're gonna direct staff to go and meet with, you know, the IA and the chamber and, you know, all the other, you know, parties that are involved in these various different events, you know, if, you know, and maybe it's just quite simply that the triathlon shouldn't happen here in July, or if it's gonna happen here in July, it can't start and finish in the downtown core, it has to start and finish in the resort community, or something like that. I think that, you know, I don't sort of propose that we have any sort of resolutions or solutions to this right here, right now. I think it's gonna, obviously, we wanna consult with everybody to figure out the best path forward, but those are what Deputy Mayor Terziano pointed out were some of the key things that I heard as well, so. Councillor Schumacher.
I'm maybe going back, but didn't 6 or 7 years ago when it started, wasn't it like second weekend in September and it started out at Deerhurst area?
Yep.
Okay.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you again, Your Worship. Actually, and further to Councillor Schumacher's comments, I think initially the start and the finish were in other parts of town. I think it was brought downtown because they thought it would be, you know, probably a bonus to the downtown to have the start and finish here, because people like to watch that kind of thing. And I think maybe in the initial changeover, it probably did work that way, but it seems like, I think you're right, on Sunday, if you get a blistering hot day like we had, then people are not going to be downtown regardless to watch the athletes. So maybe the July date might not be particularly wrong. It may be just the location of the start and finish. Maybe something should be considered.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's not much more to be discussed here, I don't know if we need a resolution or if we can just direct staff to report back to us, but I'd like that consultation to occur as quickly as possible. And some of our partners are in the audience right now, so do we need a resolution to that effect, Madam CIO? Madam Clerk? Do we? Oh. Looks as though the clerk is actually penning something right now. I like that. Can you print that? So we'll have a resolution about this in just 1 second, if that's okay. Councillor Emmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just while you're printing that off, I was talking to the event organizers at the Rib Fest, and they led me to believe that that area wasn't large enough for the type of event they want to hold anyhow.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll see that one back there this year, or next year.
Yeah. That's, get some news on that. You know, the Rib Fest is it was, I think in some ways, for some of the folks that I talked to, it was the straw that broke the camel's back to some degree. You know, it was one of those things that, you know, that it's the Lions Club that was doing it. They're not used to, you know, doing this kind of stuff, and so they're not familiar with the seat application process. They were kind of late getting into that process. Our staff, you know, have heard loud and clear that we want people to, you know, find it easy to do business in Huntsville and to work with people to try to help them. So they, you know, scrambled and, you know, pulled off what they could do, and we got things rolling, and that was great. But it happened very, very quickly, and they said the same thing to me, that, you know, at the end of the day, this probably isn't the right space for us. I'm like, well, that's a relief, because it's really angering a lot of people right now. So, and so, you know, again, this is one of those things. We don't want to stop events in this town. I mean, this is a great problem to have. I bet you they don't have these conversations in North Bay. Maybe they do. I don't know. I shouldn't slag North Bay, but you know, it's a great problem to have. You know, but we got to make sure that we don't cannibalize that for which people came here for. So, okay. So I have a motion. I'll move by Nancy Alcock, seconded by Dan Ammer. Whereas Huntsville is host to many events through the summer, be it resolved, staff be directed to work with event user groups on potential solutions to the following concerns for the summer months: communication between various stakeholders, noise, closures of parking lots and roadways. And for the staff prepare a report to the Community Services Committee with the proposed options. Questions? All those in favor? That motion is carried. Thanks, everybody. That's good. Okay, so we're into council meeting minutes now. I have a motion moved by Tim Withy, second by Jonathan Weed. Be it resolved, the following council meeting minutes be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. That's June 24th, June 26th, and July 10th. A regular council meeting and 2 special council meetings. Questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Reports for information, Huntsville Public Library Board on June 10th. Councillor Thompson, anything to highlight for us there? Library Board? Yeah.
I'm
June
sorry, I
10th.
was drifting off there for a moment. Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Thank you, Your Worship. As you know, there was a restructuring process that has been discussed at the library for some time, and that involved the hiring of a new position there. And so the interviewing process has now been completed, and we're looking forward to an announcement this week on who that successful candidate might be. As you know, each year we have the TD Bank. They promote a summer reading program, so that launched July 2nd. And this event this year was well-attended and included an animal show. As I'm sure we're all aware, and we've heard the feedback or the pushback or the phone calls and so on, and with regards to the environmental issue we had at the library. It looks like they're still working on it, but an environmental hygienist has completed an air quality surface test in June, and all testing has come back good, and I've heard reports since then, and they're still working on it, but so far everything looks good there. And Steve may be able to speak more on that. A staff development day held June 14th, and healthy communication, which is sort of topical, I guess. It's sort of appropriate considering what was going on in terms of health was discussed. And Pat Welch, who has been a friend of the library, and I think if you've been to the library at some point, you've seen Pat Welch there for sure with her husband. Anyway, she's been there as a friend of the library for 29 years. She submitted her resignation from the group, and so she, of course, has been wished all the best from the library and was given a plaque and so on and so forth. So lots of things happening as usual at the library. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Any questions, Councillor Thompson? Okay, move on to the Downtown BIA Board of Management minutes. Councillor Terziano. Deputy Mayor Terziano, I apologize. Oh, my goodness.
Thank you, Your Worship. I won't go through any of the talk about the Rib Fest and Triathlon because I've highlighted that. The BIA is actually doing a deputation on Wednesday this week to the Parks Operations Committee about a skating rink in the park. They're also working with Steve Hernan to acquire some more picnic tables for River Mill Park, some memorial benches and Muskoka chairs. We had a meeting back on June 20th that Scott Oval and Steve Hernan organized with members from the BIA and businesses that back onto River Mill Park. And we were talking about snow removal down there on June 20th. We were talking about snow removal and parking. And the BIA board is going to draft a letter to this council regarding parking and possible solutions on Darragh Way. A couple of suggestions are going to be to extend the 2-hour parking to 3-hour parking, and to possibly reinvestigate the parallel parking on Darragh Way. So that will be coming shortly.
Great. Any questions of Deputy Mayor Terziano? Okay, Committee of Adjustment from July 10th. Councillor Fitzgerald, anything riveting to share with the council from Committee of Adjustment?
Nothing too extraordinary. We had 6 applications, all minor in nature, and they were all approved as recommended by staff.
Okay.
If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Huntsville Lake Bay's Chamber of Commerce update. Councillor Weed.
Thank you, Worship. We actually canceled the meeting for July, but there's a couple things I wanted to highlight. Of course, Flavors of Ontario, Thursday, August 8th, in partnership with the Festival of the Arts, Swing on the Dock. So that's the dinner that I mentioned, which is coming up. And also, just to highlight the fact that Helena Renwick is jumped on for the summer to help out with the Chamber as a part-time staffer. So let's talk about someone who knows their way around the downtown. So a nice little addition for that, for them.
Thank you. Any questions of Councillor Wee? Okay, I'm going to give you a little update on the Municipal Accommodation Tax Association Board. So just so you know that the Municipal Accommodation Tax Association has been incorporated. The chair is Jesse Hamilton, the vice chair is Scott Dowdy, and the secretary is Christine Kropp. They've adopted a mission, which is to grow year-round occupancy in Huntsville, and their vision is to be the best tourism destination in Ontario. Values are to be collaborative, creative, progressive, inclusive, and respecting of the natural environment. They're beginning to explore a strategic planning process, and they're evaluating banking options and staff options as well. And as of May 31st, keeping in mind it started in April 1st, we started collecting. And as of May 31st, a total of $79,973.62 has been collected. So that's where we're at there. And I should have mentioned this earlier when we were talking about events, but this is one of the reasons why I think it's really important for us to have that discussion, because it looks as though they are going to really generate some significant dollars, and we'll probably be looking to host more events. So it's going to get busier. So, any questions about any of that? Okay, great. Okay, motion moved by Brian Thompson, seconded by Karen Terziano. Be resolved, the Operations and Protective Services Committee meeting minutes dated June 26, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. Councillor Thompson, anything to highlight from those minutes?
I would be glad to entertain any questions.
I would just like to make a note in the minutes that I was actually not in attendance at that meeting due to a scheduling issue.
You were very eager to make that point.
I will,
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Yeah, I will make, I guess, a couple of comments with regards to that. We did have Staff Sergeant Graham scheduled to be on our agenda, and he was on our agenda, but he couldn't make it that particular day. So he will be here this Wednesday. And this all started with a discussion about in the springtime when we were still recovering from the floods and the flooding situations and so on, and having a look at the 5-year, the last 5 years from 2013 to 2019, and the impact that the floods had or the weather changes had on operations and the cost of operations here in the town of Huntsville. And at that time, Staff Sergeant Graham volunteered to bring us a report on the same time period from the OPP perspective. And anyway, so we're looking forward to that. He's going to be here this Wednesday with regards to that. I think the one significant thing, and Director Hernan also reported on that meeting, and the one significant, I think, came out of that report from Steve with our change in operations this year when we went to the two-shift system at Public Works. And it has had such a positive impact in so many different ways. Staff is much happier with this because now they know when they're going to be getting off and when they're on call and that kind of thing. And as you know, we went from a partial contract system to a full operation system by the town of Huntsville. And Steve did some extrapolations on the cost of what this past year would have cost us with snow on the ground for 5.5 months, what operation would have cost us this year with the system we had versus a previous year when we were under contract and so on and so forth. And I think, Steve, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I heard you say that you think that the difference in what last year or this year would have cost us without this new system would have been about $500,000. So that's a significant financial advantage to the town by going to this new system type of thing. The other unfortunate thing was, of course, the cost of materials that we used this year in terms of salt and sand and so on. Our budget for the year, which is fiscal, as you know, runs January to December 31st, we're pretty close to our budget for sand and salt. So we're going to really, everyone is going to pray really hard for a really, really good November and December this year, so we can come in not overly budget-wise in terms of salt and sand.
Okay, any questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. The motion moved by Jonathan Weeb, seconded by Brian Thompson. Be it resolved, the Community Services Committee meeting minutes dated June 26, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated, with the exception of recommendation COM 2719 to be polled and voted on separately. Councillor Weeb, anything to highlight for us there?
Pretty straightforward meeting. There's, you can see in the minutes there, but I did want to highlight 5.3, which is the, you'll see the recommendation GC 13118 that was ratified by council to be rescinded. So that is the recommendation to adopt the Lord report for MHP. And we felt, as the committee felt, that rescinding that motion and getting it off the books gave us a clearer path to form a group, a working group with staff, myself, some of the members of the committee, to really look again closely at the Heritage Place and figure out some great strategies and great visions for moving forward with that wonderful town asset. So I thought that was an important moment for the municipality and for our committee, and I just wanted to highlight that. So,
Any questions? Councillor Alcock?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Weeb. So if you rescinded the Lord report recommendations, will you be using anything in that report, or?
Councillor Weeb?
thank you. That's a great question. I believe there are some things within that report and some ideas that we can use, but the way, really, after we really looked at it, the way it was presented was kind of an all or nothing type of project. And neither committee members nor staff were comfortable with either bringing the whole thing forward and footing the bill or none of it. So we felt that if we remove it if we rescind it, that motion, that means we can still pull any of the ideas we wish, but we can do it on our own terms. So we felt that was pretty important. So,
Any other questions? Call a question. All those in favor? That's carried. Okay, a motion moved by Jonathan Weeb, second by Brian Thompson. Be it resolved, staff be directed to enter into a memorandum of understanding to outline the terms of a partnership with the town of Huntsville and the Sport Lab to deliver the annual community events known as Mayor's Bike Ride and Kids Bike Rodeo. So there is a motion to amend this, moved by Jonathan Weeb, second by Brian Thompson. Be it resolved, the following paragraph be added, and for the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign any necessary documentation. Any questions on the motion to amend? I guess something got missed in the original. All those in favor of the motion to amend? It's carried. So the motion as amended is moved by Jonathan Weeb, seconded by Brian Thompson. Be it resolved, staff be directed to enter into an MOU to outline the terms of a partnership with the town of Huntsville and the Sport Lab to deliver annual community events, the Mayor's Bike Ride and Kids Bike Rodeo, and for the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign any necessary documentation. Questions? All those in favor? That's carried. I have a motion moved by Karen Tusiano, seconded by Brian Thompson. Be it resolved, the Corporate Services Committee meeting minutes dated June 26, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. Deputy Mayor Tusiano, anything to highlight there?
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first item of business was to congratulate our treasurer, Julia McKenzie, on the completion of the asset management planning professional certification. Congratulations again, Julia, now that all of council's here. We then talked about video surveillance again, and we are going to spend $5,000 or up to $5,000 to determine our video surveillance requirements throughout our various facilities, and that report will be coming back. We then spent $100,000 on the replacement system for our work order management and our operational financial reporting and public request system, which in a nutshell is a whole bunch of programs that are actually going to work together now instead of the way they are right now, and they don't. So the funding for that will come from the one-time fund we received of $600,000. So we will be spending up to $100,000 to get all those programs in place and finally working. And probably the other thing that council would like to know is we reviewed the one-third allowance for counselors, which is something we had to do, so it's done. So that one-third tax-free allowance has been reviewed, and that's pretty much the meeting.
Any questions of the deputy mayor? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. A motion moved by Dan Armour, seconded by Nancy Alcock. Be it resolved, the Development Services Committee meeting minutes dated July 10th, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. And we'll note that Councillor Thompson has declared conflict on one item in those minutes. I don't think you have to leave anymore, do you? You just sit back or something like this. Push yourself back and don't make any sudden movements. I don't know. Councillor Alcock, anything to highlight for us?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a few things. We started our meeting with an invited presentation from three Huntsville Public School students from grade 6 and 7. And they had done a town planning project in their class, and they were amazing. They were just brilliant. We are in safe hands when you see kids like that. So that was pretty neat. Followed by another presentation of invited guest, Saad Ahmed, who is from Tiny TO, which is all about backyard housing, and which was, again, very enlightening for a number of us around the table, certainly from my perspective. And it kind of was a great segue into a couple of the applications that we had before us. So we had 4 zoning amendments, and 2 of them were with respect to secondary suites in accessory buildings. And, you know, you look at, building secondary suites as of right in our province, and yet people who are coming forward to build them in their backyard, they have to go through a zoning amendment, and then we also ask that they go through a site plan approval process. So one of the applicants had asked that we forego the site plan approval process, and we had a great discussion around the table, and it was agreed that we would in both applications, both of the accessory unit applications. So it did sort of beg the larger question, maybe we should be looking at our whole process when it comes to building secondary suites. They take all sorts of forms, and if we want to encourage them, let's make it easier. And then we had 2 site plan approvals, one of which was really interesting. They were both interesting, but the one that I would like to highlight, and it's in the presentation package, a presentation from Ben Jardine from Greystone on the remake of the TD Bank in town. And it is going to be spectacular. They're bringing it back to its old historical self. A lot of work will go in that. The building won't open until next summer, but there will be 2 main retail spaces in the front, one in front, one in the back, completely redone back, and with a spectacular penthouse condominium above, just one suite above the bank. So for anybody looking at the package, our package that we had before us tonight, it's well worth looking at that. There's some lovely historical photos in that. That's it.
Great, thank you. Any questions of Councillor Alcock? Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? That's carried. Come on back, Councillor Thompson. On to reports from municipal officers now. And I'll just read this resolution. I don't know if either of them need to speak to this one, but moved by Brian Thompson, seconded by Karen Terziano. Whereas the municipality of the town of Huntsville recently experienced a high water event/flood on April 19, 2019, and has experienced incremental operating and capital costs. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Huntsville hereby requests the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to activate the Municipal Disaster Recovery Assistance Program, and further that Julia McKenzie, Manager of Finance/Treasurer, be given delegated authority to verify and attest to the accuracy of the claim. and further that expenditures related to the flood infrastructure costs as outlined in this report that are not funded through the MDRA program be funded through the working capital reserve. Questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay, we have some reports now. Report number OPS 2019-15, that's the McCully Robertson Ball Diamonds, the RFT results. Mr. Hernan, this is for information, I guess?
It's for information at this stage. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions about it? Deputy Mayor Terziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. You don't have a resolution at all?
No.
So I think I have a resolution then. Is
Okay.
this at the time that I would propose this? Yeah, okay. So I've been talking to...
Sorry, 1 second. Oh, sorry. Councillor Withy will be stepping out for a moment. Please proceed.
Okay, so through this ongoing process of tendering for the ball diamonds, and I know the tables have numerous conversations for well over a year, and I've continually talked to some of the ball groups, specifically about the infield mix. So when tender went out, I was talking to Colleen McDonald first, and then subsequently to Steve, and wanting to make sure that we got a price for an infield upgrade. And so what I have is a resolution here that I'm willing to move, if there's a seconder, to upgrade the infield mix, which was priced as a separate, so to issue the change order to do that. And I'm quite happy to go up to the $22,000 upgrade or to the $26,000. There's $4,000 difference to go to the red clay brick mix, which is the highest level, versus $22,000 to go to the mid-level. So I don't know what the rest of the council feels. I'm quite happy recommending either one. It's well over $1 million, this project, and an extra $22,000 or $26,000 to make sure that we've got great infields. I'm good with.
The tender did come in under budget, though, correct? How much under budget?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry, the original budget was $1,492,000. Tender came in at $1,222,000. The only outstanding item, just so you're aware of, is the electrical contractor just needs to confirm, once the design work's done, that they have all the power they need on site. If there's an upcharge to bring more power in, it would be added to the contract. But we are changing like for like, so we think that there shouldn't be a power problem, but that's the caveat that's thrown out there.
Okay. So, may I well, all right, I think we're supposed to actually have a motion on the floor before we start talking about a motion. Do you have a mover and a seconder for, let's say, the red clay one? The Muskoka mix? One that looks red and everyone will think it's like the pros? Is that the one we're talking about? Great. Okay, I'm going to read a motion, and then we'll go for questions. I have a motion moved by Karen Terziano, second by Brian Thompson. Whereas the McCully Robertson Ball Diamonds requests for tender results have come in under budget, and whereas the RFT provided for a standard ball mix, which is 8% gravel, 81% silt, and 10% clay, I guess. And whereas the RFT required provisional pricing on optional upgrades and additional work, including the use of a higher grade product on the infields at an additional cost, therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to issue a change order to the contract to the Muskoka infield mix, which is 5% gravel, 75% and 20% silt and clay, at an increased cost. This is written really strangely. At an increased cost of $26,208.95 plus taxes. Questions? Deputy Mayor Terziano, go ahead.
Just for clarity, Your Worship, I think they're missing the word sand in there. I think when you got 75%, it should be sand.
Okay, I
And
knew
then
something
the
was
last
wrong,
one,
I just
yeah.
didn't understand what. so it's 5% gravel, 75% sand, and 20% silt and clay. Okay, now I know the rest of the story. Questions, Councillor Armour?
Not so much a question, I just think this is great, exactly what we need there, those ball diamonds, and I support this 100%.
Any other questions? Councillor Weed?
Thank you. Just to clarify, that's 26,000 addition for the entire project? That's all 4 diamonds?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That motion is carried. Okay. Okay, we're on to bylaws. I have a motion moved by Dan Armour, seconded by Nancy Alcock. Be it resolved that bylaws number 2019-72 to 2019-80 inclusive be reported and read a first and second and third time and finally passed this 22nd day of July 2019. It's so fast now, we don't have to do 2 readings, don't have to read them all. Any questions? There's no questions. All those in favor? Unbelievable. Carried. I have a motion moved by Karen Trusiano, second by Brian Thompson. Be it resolved that the draft Town of Huntsville Trust Fund financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2018, as prepared by Pahopel and Associates, be received and approved by council. Questions? All those in favor? That's carried. I have a motion moved by Karen Terziano, second by Brian Thompson. And be it resolved that the draft Town of Huntsville consolidated financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2018, as prepared by Pahopel and Associates, be received and approved by council. Questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay, I have the council correspondence from June 17th to July 16th, if anybody's interested in any of that. We have a District of Muskoka update. Who would like to go first? Councillor Alcock?
Okay, I'll try it. Thank you, Your Worship. I think I'm only going to mention a couple of items. We had a number of meetings. I think there were 4 separate meetings this month, or 5. But the couple of items I thought worth talking about is we had our second Muskoka Housing Task Force meeting, and I think it was very successful. We broke out into 4 breakout groups, and the one that I was in was very much related to the item I mentioned earlier, which is how to make progress building secondary suites or tiny homes or coach houses or whatever it looks like throughout the district. And what we thought was easy is not easy, and there are a number of regulations that stand in the way. So one of the recommendations that will likely come out of the task force sometime in the fall will be to work with the district and whichever municipality wants to work with them to update our own zoning bylaws to make this less cumbersome, and look at changing our regulations. So that was very exciting, and way more to come on that later. The second thing is we approved at committee level going forward with a causation study pilot project for Peninsula Lake in Huntsville. There were 6 potential lakes. Peninsula Lake was the only one in Huntsville. When I say potential lakes, lakes that were identified with a couple of indicators that would cause us to spend more time studying them, looking at things like development activity, and one of the reasons why they looked at Peninsula Lake is because of the algae blooms. This study will be carried out by the Muskoka Watershed Council with the District of Muskoka, and they're doing this quite closely with the Peninsula Lake Association. So it's really actually good news for us. A couple of the other lakes in Muskoka were a little upset that we were the first one out the gate, but we had a number of indicators that led us to this one. So that was pretty exciting, but it still needs to be approved by council. And I think that's all I'm going to have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Any of that? Okay, Councillor Thompson?
Thank you. I'll be very, very brief because the Engineering and Public Works last two committee meetings, actually, the one of June 17th had so few things on the agenda that it was actually held at 4 o'clock before the district council meeting, and it was mostly had to do with awarding of contracts. And this last one, which was scheduled for last Monday, before the district council meeting, was actually canceled, and the awarding of contracts was just forwarded to the district council and dealt with the district council. So that's what's happening on at the committee level. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Withy?
Thank you, Your Worship. My meeting was also canceled. So I think Councillor Alcock took all the meeting time from everybody else.
Apparently she did. So we did have a Finance and Corporate Services Committee meeting, and it was actually fairly quick. We obviously got an update on our annual investment report. We got an update on the development charges reserve fund, all these sort of statutory things we have to do. We had a discussion about district council reimbursement for education-related costs, we came to no conclusion because I think the staff misunderstood what we were asking for. So that's going back to the drawing board. The reason we brought it up was because, of course, Mayor Smith, Bracebridge, of course, is on the AMO executive board of directors. He's chair of OSM now. He's pretty actively involved in AMO. And of course, you know, there are costs related to him doing that, and it's borne completely by, you know, the town of Bracebridge. And so Chair Klink and I had pointed out that, you know, the work that he's doing there benefits us all, and that perhaps some of those costs could be borne by the district. Anyhow, so that, yeah, they're going back to the drawing board on that one to sort of just clean it up a little bit. Yeah, that's about it. There really wasn't all that much going on there. District Council, we had a presentation from Bud Purvis from the Muskoka Airport. The one thing we did do that was really big was we approved, I think it's King William Street. We did that at that meeting, didn't we? I'm looking through this. Yeah, there it is. So, yeah, we awarded the contract for King William Street here. Again, a fairly quick meeting, not a lot going on there. We did discuss as well, we're still very much in the process of eliminating that vacant land tax exemption for commercial properties. So it's quite a process, requires consultation, which we've now made available online. The province has eliminated it for the education portion. They didn't require themselves to do public consultation on it, but they're requiring us to do public consultation on the upper tier and lower tier portions of it. It's available online, so we don't know if we'll get many comments on it or not. Apparently, the region of Waterloo did the exact same thing and had, I think, 12 comments. So anyway, we're in the process of eliminating that, and we also passed a resolution related to the Muskoka Regional Center. For those of you who don't know this long and painful saga, the Muskoka Regional Center in Gravenhurst has really fallen into a state of disrepair. The province has, they shuttered the doors and let it freeze, but didn't turn the water off and neglected the property. It's just a disaster. It is a beautiful point of land on Lake Muskoka. It has full urban services, and the town of Gravenhurst has worked really for many years through really lots of years of frustration to try to convince the province to do something with the property that would actually create jobs in the community, as opposed to just selling it off to someone that might divide it up and, you know, sell off lots for building McMansions or something like that. So, and they feel like they get somewhere with the province, and then the province changes their mind and they can't make up their mind. So the District of Muskoka, we agreed that we would try to step in and see if we might be able to facilitate a solution to help them with that. So we passed a resolution related to that as well, try to help out the good folks in Gravenhurst. So I don't know if there's any questions about any of that District of Muskoka stuff? Okay. So we do have to go into close. We'll take a little recess before, before we do that. So I'll read the motion, and then we'll take just maybe a 5 to 10 minutes to let, we recess first before I read the motion? We're going to recess first before I read the motion. So we'll take a 10-minute recess, and then we'll come back and read that motion. Thanks, everybody.